late September 1979. My husband, our 6-year-old daughter, and I moved to Mesa, Arizona to be closer to his family. We quickly found an affordable 2-bedroom home. At 750 square feet, it was perfect for the 3 of us. It seemed like a nice place for the first month that we were there. That all changed though, just before Halloween. It all started out innocently enough. My 24th birthday was arriving in about 2 weeks. My mom always liked to send me birthday cards early. This had always been her habit. That year was no exception. When I got the mail that day, there was a card from my mom. Inside the card was some birthday money. I was pretty excited to receive the money, since I had been wanting a little eyeshadow that I had seen in the grocery store a few nights earlier. In those days, our money was pretty tight as I hadn't found a job yet. I decided to hop on my bike and dash up to the store before my daughter got out of school that day. Before I left though, I wrote a note for my husband to let him know where I was going. My husband sometimes was able to stop by the house for lunch. He was a computer service technician and he traveled all over Phoenix Valley. If he happened to be near the house at lunchtime, he would just drop in. I set the note on the kitchen table and drew an arrow on it which pointed to the card. This card was especially pretty as it had a birthstone set in the center of a flower on the cover. I set it up to show that, then I left. I returned about half an hour later. My husband wasn't there, but I saw that he had been. At least, that's what I concluded by what I saw on the table. The card was flipped over and upside down. The part of the card visible now was on the back side, and the part that displayed the price was facing forward. I was so sorry that I missed seeing my husband, but I thought he was really clever in letting me know that he had been there by flipping the card in that manner. When he arrived home at the end of his workday, I told him how sorry I was that I missed him when he stopped in for lunch. He didn't know what I was talking about. He hadn't been by the house that day at all. That really freaked me out because I had made such a production of setting the card up to show the birthstone, so there was no room in my mind to doubt myself. Finally though, I told myself that I must have somehow flipped the card over myself. I had to tell myself this just to be able to sleep that night. A week went by with no strange happenings. Then, lo and behold, another spooky thing occurred. I was home alone doing housework. I was washing the dishes when I realized that I needed to go pee. When I got back to the kitchen, I saw a strange sight. A drinking glass was turned upside down on the side of the sink. I knew that I hadn't left it there, and a chill ran up my spine. That's when strange occurrences became more pronounced. I would leave a room and return to find an object turned upside down on a regular basis. It was so odd because I would literally leave a room and return within seconds sometimes. There was no way that anyone could come and go without me seeing them. It was completely impossible. The worst part about it was that no one wanted to believe me. These things only occurred to torment me, it seemed. One day though, my sister-in-law Cindy was over. We were sitting at the kitchen table at the time, and I was cooking us some macaroni and cheese. We also had a pot of coffee going. Anyway, as soon as I had finished telling her about all the weird things, she did a crazy thing. Cindy said aloud, "If you're here, show yourself." In the instant the words were gone from her mouth, the electricity died. We both immediately ran outside. We ran to the back of the fourplex to where the breaker box was. We looked inside the box, but no breakers were tripped off. I also need to add that no one was outside on that day. We called the electric company to send out a repairman. When he arrived, he quickly found the problem and fixed it. We asked him what the problem had been. He told us that a part was missing from the breaker box and he just replaced it. That really spooked Cindy and me. We had gone immediately outside when the electricity died. No one had been outside. Even if a human had done it, what were the odds of it occurring just when Cindy had asked the presence to show itself? After this incident, I was terrified. At first, the entity seemed almost playful. Turning objects upside down seemed quite harmless. Playing games with the breaker box seemed powerful and somewhat sinister. One rainy morning after my daughter left for school, I decided to go back to bed for a while. My husband had gone to work early that morning. I wasn't too surprised though when I heard him coming up the sidewalk with his keys jangling. I heard him open the front door and come into the apartment. I decided to keep the covers over my head. I was pretending to be asleep. I was going to wait until he came into the room and said something before I greeted him. Silly, I know. I heard him come into the room. He was standing by the bed. I could hear him breathing, yet he never spoke. Finally, I whipped the covers off my head and yelled boo, but no one was there. At this point, I was petrified. I was getting up out of bed with the intention of putting my clothes on as quickly as possible to get out of the house. But just as I stood up beside the bed, something pushed me back down. I was screaming and crying for it to stop. This appeared to anger the entity as it pushed me even harder and more forcibly. I feared I would be crushed and no one would ever understand my death or how it had occurred. Just when I felt like I couldn't take any more pressure and live, it stopped. Just as quickly as it all happened, it was over. I immediately got dressed and drove to my mother-in-law's house for the day. I was not going to stay alone in that house. Not that day anyway. I then began to have awful nightmares of dismembered bodies. I dreamt that our house was on a patch of land that had been used as a Native American burial ground. The dreams were confusing because not only did I dream of burial grounds, but I also dreamt of cannibalistic men dressed as cowboys of the Old West. The nightmares were revolting in an evil way, and I was utterly horrified. Literally, the nightmares were so dark and gruesome, I began to dread going to sleep. Soon after these experiences, I got a job that would keep me away from the house during the day. I worked weekdays from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. That was perfect for me because our daughter got out of school at 3 p.m. Therefore, I would hardly ever be alone in the house, and neither would she. My husband would drive her to school before he went to work, and I'd always be there to pick her up after school. I liked that just the way it was. I can recall my first day at my new job. There was such a feeling of excitement to be away from the frightening things that were going on inside our apartment. I even wondered if the entity was upset that I wasn't there to torment. One day though, the presence still managed to give me a spook. I had just picked up my daughter from school. We were going to go over to my mother-in-law's house, but my daughter wanted to change her clothes first. We stopped by our apartment. I went to the bathroom while she changed in her bedroom. As I was washing my hands in the bathroom, I decided to move a little plaque off of the bathroom shelf and put it away. The plaque read, "All that I like is either immoral, illegal, or fattening." For some reason that day, the plaque made me feel disgusted. I hated its message. So I took it off the shelf and put it in the cabinet underneath the bathroom sink. I noticed that the shelf needed to be dusted as there was a clean line where the plaque had rested. I decided to leave the dusting until I returned from my mother-in-law's house. The time passed quickly as we visited with my in-laws. We finally returned home. I was glad that I made it home before my husband because I still needed to dust the bathroom shelf before starting dinner. I got some cleaning supplies from under the kitchen sink and went into the bathroom. I stood frozen in shock at what I saw. There sat the plaque, exactly where it had been before I had moved it and put it away. It was even sitting perfectly in line with all the dust surrounding it. I immediately rushed my daughter out of the house and to the car. I drove straight to a payphone and called my mother-in-law. She sent my brother-in-law over to stay with us. It didn't really help all that much to have someone else there. I was utterly terrified of being in this apartment. That May, we got our tax refund and we used the money to move. We moved away from Mesa and got an apartment in Phoenix. Luckily, the entity did not follow us there to our new home. Back in 2012, I was a senior in high school. One time, I babysat the infant son of a couple who were close family friends. I put the baby down to bed early, probably 8 o'clock or so. He slept upstairs while I chilled downstairs in the living room, watching TV with the baby monitor nearby. The parents said they'd be back around midnight. At around 11 o'clock, I heard the baby screaming through the baby monitor, and I don't mean crying, I mean screaming. I worked at a daycare all through high school, and even to this day, I have never heard a baby scream like this. It didn't sound like he was upset, or crying for food, or a diaper change. The scream made my hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stand up, as if my instinct could pick up on some kind of primal terror inflicted within. I ran up the stairs, opened the door of the baby's room, and turned on the lights. He was there, standing in the crib, holding himself up on the rail with one hand. His other hand was pointing at the closet, still screaming. I picked him up, and he calmed down a bit as I patted him on the back. I brought him downstairs with me, as his parents were going to be home within the hour. I didn't have the courage to check the closet. I'm not ashamed to say it freaked me out, as it was just me and this baby in the house. The parents arrived home around midnight, as they had said. There was some confusion and frustration as to why the baby was still awake with me downstairs. When they questioned me about this, I told them what had happened. I honestly thought I'd sound like an idiot and was kind of worrying about how would I explain it leading up to their arrival. However, when I said what happened, the mother's expression dropped. She shook her head and welled up, obviously distraught, and took her son upstairs without a word. That was weird, because remember, these are family friends. We were usually on good terms. The father apologized on her behalf and for what I had experienced. He shared that his wife had been seeing the ghost of a Civil War soldier standing at the foot of their bed. He had never seen it, but he knew her fear was real and that they didn't know how to explain it. I never experienced anything paranormal myself that night. However, I have never seen anyone react with such fear and distress for seemingly no reason. The way the baby screamed, the way the mother's demeanor immediately changed when I said what happened, that's what still gives me the creeps. This all started in 2012. My parents are divorced, and my dad remarried in 2007. So in turn, I have a larger than average immediate family, as my dad had 2 more kids with my stepmom, in addition to my full sister and stepbrother. My youngest sister at the time was 2, so she was just developed enough to speak fluently. One day she started talking to someone she referred to as the man. My other siblings and I played it off the first few times as the rambling of a 2-year-old, but it became harder to ignore as the conversations became more frequent. She would laugh and talk to someone while staring at a corner, and you could hear her talking over the baby monitor. So one day I asked her who she was talking to. She looked at me and said, "Bill." This really freaked me out. Not only because she didn't know anyone by that name, but because that was my granddad's name. Keep in mind, this is my dad's daughter with his current wife. A few days later, my dad comes up to me and tells me about a dream he had where my mom's mom was yelling at him. He had fallen asleep in the living room in his chair, and in the dream, my granddad was in the rocking chair across from him. When he woke up, the rocking chair was rocking as though someone was sitting on it. After this dream, activity shot through the roof. Doors started opening and closing by themselves. TVs would turn on and off at will, all along with random channel changes. You would randomly get a feeling of dread in certain rooms. Then my older sister tells me she had a dream. In this dream, there is someone in the corner of her bedroom saying,
"We're gonna get your sister. We're gonna get her, you know."
Finally, it's the time of the month where we go to my mom's house. Now, all of this weirdness started with what seemed to be her parents. So after my sister and I told her about all of this, she just laughed and said, "If they're my parents, why aren't they haunting me?" At this point, we heard a noise like something being dragged across the kitchen floor. We walked into the kitchen and found a short stepping stool that was usually tucked in the pantry sitting in the middle of the kitchen. After this, the activity kicked up at my mom's too. Doors closing, lights turning on and off, and a fixation with moving that same stepping stool to the middle of the kitchen, no matter how many times we put it back. So about 6 months pass with consistent activity at both houses. I would have friends over and bet them money that if we went to go get food, when we came back, that stool would be sitting in the middle of the kitchen. It became so common that it was just normal. Everyone just became desensitized to it all. Then one day, my little sister, who had just turned 3, was waving to someone through the window that overlooked the backyard. I asked her who she was waving at, and she said, "Bill, he's leaving," and she was almost in tears. After that, everything came to a complete halt. When I was 14 years old, we lost my childhood home. My brother moved to live with our dad. My sister and her boyfriend got their own apartment, and I decided to stay with my mom and stepdad. My grandma owned the house we had been living in and lost it when she filed for bankruptcy. She didn't tell us this until the bank showed up to do an inspection and gave us 30 days to move out. My mom's best friend owned a house and said that we could move in and fix it up. This place was seriously outright disgusting. Like, I'm talking holes in the floors, bug infestations, stained crusty carpet, toilets filled with old poop. It hadn't been lived in for a few years, and the people who lived there previously lived like pigs. The first month in the house was by far the worst. I couldn't sleep at night because I could hear muffled voices through the vents all night. I started sleeping with loud music playing. Every morning the basement door was wide open, even though we closed it and latched it at night because it had a serious spider infestation. We thought it might have been my mom sleepwalking at first, until it continued to happen while she was in a psych hospital. All of my friends were too afraid to come spend the night again, because they said it was too creepy and felt like they were being watched at night. My mom always slept on the couch because she couldn't be on the stairs after she took her pills, and constantly said that she could see somebody looking at her from the kitchen doorway. We took it as her hallucinating until I saw it for myself when I stayed down there to keep her company one night. It was tall and completely black, almost like a really defined shadow. I was completely paralyzed with fear. I physically could not look away until it walked out the doorway back towards the other room. I confirmed with my mom that she saw it and made her go upstairs. My boyfriend saw it a few weeks later when he was helping my stepdad fumigate the basement. He said it was just standing in the corner, staring at them, and they pretty much noped the fuck out of there. We lived there for a year after that, and I saw it twice more, and each time was just as terrifying as the first. My mom said she saw it every single night, even when she started sleeping upstairs again. When we finally moved out, we saged the house and put a salt circle around it. Within 2 months of living elsewhere, my mom got clean and her depression got 1,000 times better. I later married the friend who owned the house and have been there a few times since, but it's too uncomfortable to stay there for more than a few minutes. That house is literally messed up. My fiance and I live in an old house built in the late 1800s that up until the 1980s was owned by one of the first hospitals built in our area. Most of the houses on our block were also owned by the hospital and were primarily used as nurse and doctor quarters and offices. All of the houses in the neighborhood are connected via the basement, but those passages have long since been blocked off. We have lived here for about 3 years now, and I have always felt like there is something in the house with us. We will frequently hear voices, footsteps, the pets will follow things that aren't there with their eyes, etc. I have never felt like the presence is malicious. However, it is unnerving, especially when you're home alone at night. So fast forward. We had our first child 6 months ago. Ever since she was a bit over a month old, she has slept through the night with no real issues. Generally, she will fall asleep between 7 to 8 p.m. and not wake up until anywhere between 6 to 8 the following morning. So last night my fiance had to work late, so I was on duty watching the baby. 7 p.m. rolls around, and while the baby is clearly tired, she keeps trying to turn and stare at the bedroom door as I'm trying to rock her to sleep. She continues to do this for a good hour and a half, with me putting her down and moving the chair to try to keep her from staring at the door. She won't stop staring and is beginning to get a little cranky because she wants to sleep. So eventually I get up and I shut the bedroom door. Around 10 p.m., I managed to get her to fall asleep and get her laid down in her crib. I lay down in the bed myself and began playing chess on my phone and wait for my fiance to get home from work. At about 11 p.m., I hear the floorboards creak outside the bedroom door. I kind of figured it was one of the dogs wanting to be let in, so I went over and opened the door to let him in. But nothing was there. I got a very uneasy feeling that something just wasn't right. My gut clenched up, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Trying to be logical and calm though, I walked over to the spare bedroom to see if the dog had gone in there. Right when I flipped the bedroom light on, my daughter started screaming at the top of her lungs as if she was in pain. I quickly ran in and grabbed her and could not get her calm until my fiance got home from work. Normally I'm a pretty rational person and would assume that maybe she just startled herself in her sleep, but I can't get over that feeling that washed over me when I opened the bedroom door and the timing of it happening as soon as I walked into the other room and flipped on the light. We did check over her for marks and didn't notice anything that stood out to us, and my fiance's mom came over and smudged the house today. So hopefully that will be the end of it all.